Hello class. Today we're going to talk about comparing and ordering an absolute value of integers. It's a very simple concept, so let's dive in. First, we need to make sure we understand the idea of opposites. Numbers that are the same distance from zero on a number line, but in opposite directions, are called opposites. Some examples may be -4 and +4, because the -4 is 4 units away to the left of 0, and +4 is 4 units to the right from 0. So they are both the same distance away from 0, just in opposite directions. And the reason why we need to know about opposites is because the set of integers are the whole numbers and their opposites. So whole numbers, as we talked about yesterday, whole numbers are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're all the counting numbers plus 0. Well, the opposites are the ones that are on the other side of 0. -1, -2, -3, and so on and so forth. And what that leads us into is something called absolute value. And we'll talk about this toward the end of the lesson today. Absolute value is a number's distance from 0 on a number line. So it's just how far that number is from 0. And the one thing that you need to know that's super important is that distance is always positive. Distance is always positive. You cannot go in a negative distance. Okay? So let's talk about our lesson today. Our lesson is going to be in 3 parts. The first part is we need to learn to read and write integers according to a situation. Because integers are all around us. So we need to understand how to write that. We're going to compare and order integers. And then last but not least, we're going to look at the absolute value of integers. So let's look at reading and writing integers. On each of these situations here, we want to write an integer that represents that situation. For example, in this first one it says a loss of 8 yards. Well, the word loss refers to negative, refers to minus. So this whole situation says a loss of 8 yards would be minus 8 yards. And anytime you write an answer according to a situation, you must have a label on it. So in the second one, we got 15 degrees above normal. Well, the word above means positive. So this would be 15 degrees is how we would write this integer. The third one says you made $45. Well, made says that you're in the positive. So that's a positive. So we would have $45, $45. A debt of 36. Well, the word debt refers to minus or negative. So we would have negative $36. And then the last one says 100 feet below sea level. Well, the word below refers to a negative. So that would be minus 100 feet. Now, some of you might say, well, since we talked about absolute value, that distance is positive, why isn't this answer positive? Because in this particular one, the below sea level part is referring to a direction in which you're traveling, not a distance. Okay? So that's how we read and write integers to a given situation. Just remember, if it's negative, you must have a negative on it. Positives, you don't have to have the positive, but each one of these must have a label on the answer. So let's go to part 2. Part 2 is comparing and ordering integers. So the first question I ask is, what does it mean to compare numbers? Well, compare basically means determine which number has a greater value. And we have a good friend that can help us determine which one is greater, and that is Mr. Numberline. The number line can help us determine which number is the greatest. So if I were to look at 2 numbers such as 4 and 5 and ask which number is the greatest of those, we would definitely say 5. And the reason why we would say that is because 5 is furthest to the right on this number line. As the numbers move to the right, they get bigger. As the numbers move to the left, they're getting smaller. So the reason why all along this number line, one number is bigger than another is because the number is furthest to the right. And that's the statement I want us to use. Because if I were to come over here and say, what about -4 and -5? Which one of those numbers is greater? We would have to say the -4, because -4 is furthest to the right on the number line. And that's what we do when we want to compare numbers. So let's see if we can compare a few numbers. What if I were to give you 5, circle, and 8? Well, on a problem like this, we're expecting you to use some symbols like the greater than, less than, or equal to symbols. Now, this first symbol, what is it? Well, it's actually the less than symbol. And we know it's the less than symbol because it makes an L shape. This number then would be the greater than symbol because it doesn't make an L. So over here in this problem where we've got 5, circle 8, we would know that the 8 is actually the bigger number. So we would put a less than symbol because we would read this as 5 is less than 8. Okay? And the reason why is because the 8 is furthest to the right. Well, what if I gave you -12 and -14? Well, in this particular case, with the -12 and the -14, the -12 is actually furthest to the right, so we would use a greater than symbol. Okay? And if I gave you a positive number and a negative number, we know the positive numbers are always going to be bigger than negative, so in this case 7 is greater than -2. And that's how we compare two numbers. And the reason why we need to compare those is because sometimes we may have to put them in order. So let's look at this set of numbers, and I ask you to put them in order. The first question you should ask me then is, what order do you want? Because we've got two of them, either greatest to least or least to greatest. And we can use a number line to help us determine that. Okay? So if I ask you to put them in order from least to greatest, what we could do is we could take each of these numbers, place them on the number line, and then put them in. We can just read them from either left to right or right to left, depending upon what order we need. So in this case, we've got a -6, we have a 5, we have a -3, we have a -4, we have a 0, we have a 3, we have a 7, and we have a -2. So now based on that, if I want these numbers in order from least to greatest, we would write them -6, -4, -3, -2, 0, 3, 5, and 7. If I wanted these in order from greatest to least, I would just write it the other way. 7, 5, 3, 0, -2, -3, -4, and -6. Simple as that. So if I were to ask you to put this set of numbers together, put them in order from greatest to least, we would think about them in terms of a number line, and then we would write them according to that. And in this case, if they were on a number line, we would write them from right to left. So take just a moment to do that. So the correct order should be, if you look at this set of numbers, the biggest number is 7. So it's the first one that you write. Okay, then the next one is 5. Next one, 3. Next one, 2. Then we go into the negatives. So then we've got -3, then -6, then -7, and then last but not least, -9. And that would be your correct order for this problem. Now the last part of this lesson is talking about absolute value. And we wrote the definition just a few minutes ago. Absolute value is a number's distance from 0 on a number line. Well, there's a particular way of writing problems for absolute value. We place two lines around the number. And the way we read this problem is, how far is, this line right here asks the question, how far is 3, and then this line says from 0. So this problem asks, how far is 3 from 0? Well, the distance a number is from 0 is 3, because this number is 3 away. Now what if I gave you the problem of -5? Well, this one says, how far is -5 from 0? So if we look on the number line and we go from 0 to -5, how far is that away from 0? It is 5. Not -5, because I didn't ask you which direction it was going. I just asked you how far that number was from 0, and it's 5. So you'll notice anytime we have a problem like this, the answer is always going to be positive. So if I gave you 5 questions like this right here, 5, or the absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of negative 7 is 7. The absolute value of 3 is 3. The absolute value of negative 4 is 4. And the absolute value of negative 25 is 25. No matter what the number is inside the absolute value bars, your answer will always be positive. So what we've talked about today is we've gone through 3 parts of a lesson. We've learned to read and write integers, and we know that we have to have a label on our answer if we do that. We've talked about comparing and ordering integers with greater than, less than, or using a number line to determine our order. And the first question we have to ask if we're putting integers in order is, what order do you want? Greatest to least or least to greatest? And we've talked about the absolute value of integers, which is how far that number is from 0. Not what direction, just how far. And distance we know is always positive.